Coming up on this episode of the Roundtable.
Among the things that have really caused people to be jaded, one thing that we haven't talked about at all is immigration, right? Is just which is like kind of the enormous glaring one. Something like 300,000 immigrants, it now turns out, have been not simply bussed across the border, not simply allowed across the border, but flown across the border by the Biden administration to locations that they will not reveal for supposed security reasons. They're doing this through the CBP1 app, which, as far as I can tell, is kind of like DoorDash, but for permanent residency in the United States. Like, it's like you call an Uber, except it's now a private jet that takes you from Venezuela to Cleveland and just leaves you there. Welcome once again to the Roundtable, your weekly publishers and editors podcast here at the American Mind. I'm your host, Spencer Klavan, features editor of the American Mind and associate editor of the Claremont Review of Books. And I am joined for another buddy cop movie, another good cop, bad cop film with managing editor Seth Barron today. Seth, how you doing?
I'm good, Spencer. How are you? I think it's bad cop, bad cop.
Yeah, I think it's probably at this point we're both persona non grata. But okay, I was going to ask if you wanted to be the good cop or the bad cop, but I guess we
either way.
Okay, fair enough. We'll find out as the episode unfolds.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I mean, it's Super Tuesday. We have to talk about that. More than a dozen states had their primaries yesterday, as of this recording. It'll be 2 days ago when you hear us, probably. And what to say? I mean, not a lot of surprises. In fact, I would say almost a resounding dearth of surprises. Mm-hmm. Total sweep, right, for Trump and for Biden. Two little teeny tiny victories for Nikki Haley, who subsequently dropped out, but she did get Washington, D.C. and Vermont. So I guess she can say it was not. Maybe that's why she was staying in. It's just she was waiting to get one state. Everybody thinks she dropped out because she didn't win any states. Maybe she dropped out because she got one state, and now she can say she did it. Anyway, she's gone. And as Seth wrote in a really nice piece for Unheard, which we will link to in the show notes, this essentially now confirms what we've been saying on this podcast is the situation that we all need to sort of grapple with, which is that we are running a Trump-Biden rematch. Mm-hmm. There's really nothing besides the Haley blip. There's nothing to say to qualify Trump's win, I don't think. There are maybe some things to say to qualify Biden's win. He's had this uncommitted movement, which routinely sort of opposes Democratic candidates. This over the commitments to Israel and so forth, and now with Gaza, this was a big thing. Over 100,000 voters went for uncommitted in Michigan. Which is more than in Michigan. Yeah, big show up for turnout for uncommitted in Michigan. But that's partly because turnout is just bigger overall. Like percentage wise, it's about the same as what happened with Obama. So either this is a big deal or it's a nothing burger. Basically, we are in Trump. We are now really, for all intents and purposes, in the Trump-Biden presidential race. And it's March, so we've got a long road ahead. Seth, did I leave anything out there that we should say about?
I mean, not particularly. I sort of think that Nikki Haley's victories, in a way, I think that it's good that she stayed in to get those victories, because it kind of clarifies certain things, at least about what it means to be a Washington, D.C. Republican. I mean, Washington, D.C. went, I think, 95%, 93% for Biden in the 2020 election. So there aren't that many Republicans there anyway. And then to think that the ones that are there support Nikki Haley for president, it's kind of like DC and Vermont Republicans, or like moderate Democrats as they're known anywhere else in the country. I mean, that's what we're talking about, right? We're not talking about like, I mean, it's sort of interesting to think like this rump faction of, never Trumpers, committed globalists, people who think that the Ukraine war advocates, at least in DC, I get the feeling that's who DC Republicans are.
If not all Ukraine hawks are DC Republicans, then at least like all DC Republicans are sort of enthusiastic Ukraine.
Oh, absolutely.
It's like they're like really into the idea of crusading.
Sure. And I imagine Vermont Republicans at this point are, I don't know, like real enviro nuts and kind of, major virtue signalers on social issues. I mean, the Northeast used to have a fair number of Republicans. I don't know how many are in Vermont right now. Vermont's weird. Vermont's like got the most liberal gun laws in the entire country.
I did not know that.
Liberal in the sense of
actually liberal.
Yeah. Like you can get I think getting a gun and carrying it around is about as controversial legally in Vermont as like buying a hammer and
like a Snickers bar. Yeah.
There's virtually no laws about it, or at least that's the way it used to be.
Is that because they're all hunting up there? So that's basically what they're thinking about. I have no idea. Because that's really counterintuitive.
Not even. It's just like they don't have any crime up there.
Oh,
I mean,
right. Yeah.
The state is like 95% white. It's pretty well off. And it probably even in the parts that aren't that well off, there's just, I mean, it's not like you have a lot of like hiccups. It's not an issue. I mean, guns are just like a tool. If you want one, get one.
Right. So, I mean, this was kind of the crux of your piece, was like, this is the nail in the coffin of another figure whose name we will mention later on in the podcast, like the David French sort of wing. This is like the end of that in some definitive sense. We've talked, maybe it was last week, maybe it was 2 weeks ago, about how there was after the Trump loss in 2020, it was like, well, maybe we're going to go back to that, or maybe we're going to replace it with some other like Trump is. And like, as you say, no, like we really have reconfirmed that Trump is kind of where the party is at, where it's headed, whatever that means. Here's a question that I have for you. So to my mind, now that we are officially, unofficially in this race between Biden and Trump, it kind of becomes this fight over whose base dislikes them least. So Trump and Biden are both trying to get as much of their, like the Democrat and Republican vote as possible. And they both have these significant minority factions within their base that genuinely don't like them or hold their nose or like actively have committed never to voting for them. And with Trump, it's, all the court cases, it's January 6th, it's this whole sort of set of issues that has emerged since 2020, the Stop the Steal stuff, all of that. And there's like a question about whether if he does get convicted, will that change the game or so on and so forth. So Trump's kind of, in my view, like racing against that. And both of these guys are like shadow boxing in some ways. And then if that's true for Trump, then Biden is like shadow boxing kind of the people that would vote for uncommitted, also the people that are super freaked out about his age, which is more and more, the Democrats that like are, they might be to the left of Biden, they might be centrist, but they just feel like they're kind of realists about what a doddering buffoon he is.
Right.
And he's got to fight off that. Which of those do you think is a bigger problem? Like, does Biden have bigger problems with the Democrats, or does Trump have bigger problems with the Republicans?
Well, what's interesting? The last 8 years have been like a tremendous like refinement in the Republican Party. Like they've sort of like they've subjected the electorate to so much scorn and hate that it's burned off all the dross. Like all the never Trumpers have left. They're not Republicans anymore. They're all like
if anyone is going to be convinced by like public opprobrium to leave the Republican Party, they have been convinced, is what you're saying.
They're gone. Yeah.
I mean, that's at some cost.
Look at even like the last 6 or 9 months. Like, we know plenty of people who were very pro DeSantis or pro Tim Scott or Ramaswamy. Like there were plenty of options, right? And but it seems like in retrospect, well, it was just all the terminally online. This was like strictly a Twitter based dispute. It seems like the
100%. Yeah, and I count like very much, I chief among sinners. Like, yes, absolutely, I count myself among these people.
But the core, the heart and soul of the Republican Party, it seems like it was pretty much, rock solid behind Trump the whole time.
Right.
And there wasn't even any doubt. It was like immediately he didn't have to show up for any of the debates. He just ran as the presumptive winner, and he was. Which is interesting.
Stuff as you pointed out in your piece, like once again, as in 2016, all the stuff that was supposed to crash him actually helped him, like all the whatever convictions or rather the accusations and the court cases. So we voted last night in the Tennessee primaries, walked next door, and I must say everything was I have only praise for how everything was conducted in my little polling booth. Okay. Everything was very orderly and well executed. And I was thinking about it because you can still vote for DeSantis at least in Tennessee. I don't know how it works everywhere, but you can vote for DeSantis and you vote for delegates. Like you choose the people that will go and cast the vote for whoever you've chosen. And so for me, like, I would never cast, after the experience of the last 8 years, I would never cast a protest vote in the general election. But I thought this is the perfect place to cast. This is like totally irrelevant. Here's Tennessee. This is the perfect place to cast, to register your opinion that it would have been nice. So it was kind of like Requiem for a Dream, right? Like a DeSantis bro says goodbye to this. And now I'm going to go on and just accept the reality of Trump Biden. And the alternative, as you're saying, would have been instead for me to just like go, like anybody that has decided he's just DeSantis all the way and will die with that ship, or Haley or whatever, those people have now peeled off. Their last chance to exit was basically yesterday. And now that is over. Do you think there's a case to be made that the same is true of the sort of radical anti-Israel left? Like, is that a very online phenomenon? Because Biden seems convinced that he must appease these psychopaths that want Israel to be wiped off the face of the map. And that too is something that we see online all the time. And Kamala Harris is out here like basically, declaring holy war. Is that like akin to the DeSantis mistake, or do those people have more power in the party than their?
Well, they're the types who will turn out and like chase people around and cause a ruckus and stand in traffic and do all that sort of thing. And it's a tiny minority, but they're out there. But look at California. Adam Schiff, of all people, like destroyed his Democrat competitors, both of whom were to the left of him on Israel. Like he's complete, like, he's not going to cross that line. But Barbara Lee, who's been a congresswoman for like 20 or 30 years, lost her district. And she was like she was the only vote against the Afghanistan war. She's been like calling for a ceasefire all along. She lost her district. So I think that's going to kind of signal to the Biden people like, well, it's not clear how seriously we have to take this threat. I think that they're going to have Kamala out there making noise about a ceasefire in Gaza and stuff. But you know what? These people in Michigan, when it comes down to it, they're not going to sit it out. I don't really think they will. They say this sort of thing all the time. Like we have to stop letting them take us for granted. The far left.
Yeah, but they're either going to just plunk for Biden, or they're unwinnable for Biden. Like they would never, nothing Biden could ever do in reality would win them over. Yeah, I mean, one difference that strikes me about these two very online, or at least sort of louder than significant factions is, as has become clear, and as we've been talking about, the DeSantis kind of online, Trumpism without Trump faction turned out to have kind of like less vigor and energy than the Trump MAGA all the way people were much more sort of excited and active. Compare that to the crazies who want, Israel exterminated or, a ceasefire or whatever they say they want.
Yeah.
As you pointed out, those guys they'll take to the streets. Like all of the ideological kind of vigor and fervor, it seems, of the Democrat Party is concentrated among this tiny extreme minority.
Right.
Which is like, maybe that's just the way it looks from the outside, but it seems to me like the Gaza left is way more like active and in control than the sort of DeSantis right turned out.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they're kind of like this. I mean, look, if you want to look, where's the energy on both sides?
Yeah,
Trump has these rallies where, like, I don't know, 40,000 people show up screaming and like going crazy and like loving it.
Right.
Whereas Biden has a rally and they can maybe get like 30 people, like, hacks, maybe 200 people. They round up. Like we were saying, like they have to move the bleachers in the high school lunchroom where his rallies are held to make it look like there's a lot of people there. But the Gaza people, like they can turn out thousands to go and like scream and picket children's hospitals, and get an occasional content cremator to burn himself alive in front of the Israeli consulate.
Right.
But
a viral suicidal influencer. Jeez.
Yeah. I mean,
what a grim concept.
Apparently they really want to shut down the DNC. They want to make it like a Chicago 68, and they'll probably have some success at that. I mean, they're gonna try to keep them outside the building, but there's going to be a lot of them inside too. Look, it's an interesting question. I don't think it certainly doesn't help Biden having these people on his left making all this noise, but whether that will be like the thing that really, does him in or not, that's another question.
No, I mean, I think if something does him in, it's going to be the other parcel of issues, that like his age and the fact that he's been a terrible president and all the inflation.
Did you see that thing the other day where he had some kind of meeting and there were press there, and at the end he's like, well, I can't answer I'll get in trouble if I answer any questions. And he puts the microphone down and they're shouting questions at him. And he just looks so out of it and forlorn and confused. And then you hear the voices of his handlers saying, okay, thank you, everybody. Thank you. Okay, thank you. It's over now.
Obama is waiting in the wings to rub whatever, massage Biden's shoulders and like squirt Gatorade into his mouth. Yeah.
Right.
I mean, or inject him with whatever like terrible chemical they're using to keep him alive. Yeah. I mean, equally sort of distressing to me was the Seth Meyers appearance where he like ate ice cream on late night while talking about an imaginary deal that seems to not actually be going on. Yeah. So that stuff is just like, I keep thinking they're going to get more serious about replacing him. But
well, you know what? It's kind of like, it's weird. Like there's this idea, well, yes, eventually they're just going to move him out and put somebody else in. But maybe
whomst. Yeah. And also
yes, and maybe they don't really maybe they can't. I mean, he just seems like his cantankerousness and Dr. Jill's vanity seem to be like the motive force behind his candidacy. It's like really weird.
Right. And just the cosmic level self-own of having chosen Kamala Harris as vice president is the other, like,
it's very funny.
It's so good. Yeah.
But what's funny is, like, I guess he did an interview with the New Yorker. Biden did, saying, Trump is a loser. I'm going to beat him. I beat him. I'm the only man who's beat him. I can beat him again. And then his aides indicated that the focus of the campaign is going to be J6. Like, this is what they're going to focus on. Because I guess they're thinking, like, in 2020, Biden's campaign focused completely on Charlottesville.
Right.
And then the George Floyd stuff, right? Like, look at all of the fascism, look at all of the danger to democracy and the white supremacy that Trump supposedly said he was in favor of.
Right.
And that won. So I guess they're like, well, we're just going to double down. But it's like, it's tragedy repeating as farce, because like the J6 was a total confection. And
that has now, like, ever since been more and more clear, and the ways that the Democrats invoke it have become more and more absurd, and also it has faded into the background of history. Like, I can barely even remember a time before COVID. Like, you think that these Democrats are out here like vividly reliving the trauma. I mean, talk about like an online only state of mind, the frame of mind in which some like blue dog Democrat somewhere in a flyover state is like lying awake at night in the fetal position, like rocking back and forth, remembering at the time Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez almost had to pass in the hallway somebody. Right. Like, that's not going on. And but it is sort of, it's what
I haven't spoken to, I live in Manhattan, okay?
Right.
Between Manhattan, Washington, I have not spoken to anyone, maybe one person, who has ever mentioned January 6th as an insurrection, as anything.
Right.
I don't think that outside of like, the New York Times editorial board or like I don't even think like hardcore Democrat, like electeds, believe that it's like a major thing. Who is really captivated or moved by this question?
I mean, I do not live in New York, but I do live in the hipsteriest part of Nashville, which is where all of the deep blue people in this city flee for refuge.
Yeah.
And the other day I was doing perhaps the bougiest, hipsteriest thing it's possible to do, which is going to a wine tasting at this little shop down the street. And I struck up a conversation with this lady that was out of some kind of New Yorker cartoon about this neighborhood. And she like used the phrase "the insurrection," and it was all I could do to stop myself from saying, "What? The what?" Like, because as you say, that's the first time I've ever heard that phrase used in conversation to describe those events, like by any person in any part of the political spectrum. I have to add in another topic here because we're right on this subject. The court case, the SCOTUS ruling from the Supreme Court about the decision about the attempt in Colorado to throw Trump off the ballot.
Yeah,
this was as we discussed the possibility that this would be a unanimous decision. This was a unanimous decision with a lot of dissent and difference of opinion folded in with these concurrences. So I think this is like kind of a dumb and obvious story with a really interesting and subtle story folded kind of inside of it, or secretly nesting within. Because as we discussed, like the actual Colorado idea was so preposterous that you're going to use this post-Civil War part of the 14th Amendment, well, I guess all parts of the 14th Amendment are post-Civil War, but this insurrection clause in the 14th Amendment that sort of bars officers from being elected from among those who have participated actively in an insurrection. And the question that was begged by this decision was that Trump did in fact do an insurrect, and not only did the people on January 6th commit an insurrection, but Trump was the ringleader of it, and he intended to overthrow the government and all of these things. And so basically everybody it was sort of like back when Ruth Bader Ginsburg agreed that Obama couldn't make recess appointments. It was like even Sonia Sotomayor says you can't. This decision doesn't make any sense. But within that unanimous decision, there's disagreement about why this decision was stupid and wrong, and like which part of the 14th Amendment it fails to satisfy. So the majority went with the idea that that the amendment is not self-executing, which means that the court doesn't just get to decide that you violated it and then automatically you are barred, Congress has to make a law to kind of enforce the whole thing. The other options for this were that maybe the president is not covered under the officers who are excluded here from holding office. And then the other possibility is that this whole sort of that the Trump needed to be convicted first in a lower court of having. So like, some of these arguments seem like, actually all of these arguments seem plausible to me. But the interesting thing is that the opponents of Trump, the strongest opponents of Trump, are presenting the option that the Supreme Court went with as this like vast judicial power grab, that like they totally struck down the power of this amendment because now the courts can't just decide. It has to be Congress that makes these decisions. But I actually think that the majority decision, I mean, look, I am in no way a lawyer, but it seems like the majority decision is designed specifically to lower the temperature of this and all other such situations, should we find ourselves in another one, by saying, look, it's not actually the court's role to like bestow or to condemn somebody and bar them from office. Like, that's such a serious matter that Congress has to step in. Whereas if they had said this, he's not an officer, then they would have said in no situation can any president be found guilty under this. Whereas they've kind of left open the possibility that Congress could, under other circumstances, or even in this circumstance, say that, yes, actually Trump can't be on the ballot. And then if they had done the other thing where they had said like he has to be convicted, then again, it's in the courts to like try, their political opponents. Anyway, do you see what I'm getting at? Like, it actually seems like there was some very subtle maneuvering going on within this decision.
Yeah, but that certainly didn't stop the left from like mourning. I mean, everybody knew that this was going to come down. I mean, either 8-1 or 9-0. I mean, there couldn't be any doubt. I guess they just seemed very crestfallen and kind of chagrined that it really was a unanimous decision. I don't know if you saw like Keith Olbermann saying that Supreme Court must be dissolved. Okay,
how could I possibly have missed it when he tweeted it again and again and again? It wasn't even a retweet. It was just like the same tweet, like dissolve the Supreme Court.
I mean, he's crazy, but everybody on like Dana Bash, like who supposedly pretends she's some kind of serious journalist. She was saying like, oh, this is just like this a major failure by the Supreme Court. Like the ladies on The View were very worked up about it. David French.
Oh my God.
I mean, David French was hired to be like the evangelical conservative voice on the New York Times. And he said this basically means that the 14th Amendment is defunct. I mean, is that essentially?
Yes. It's been erased was I think the headline.
Yeah.
Phrase. And if you read the piece, it's basically just making the sort of anti-Trump argument that I gestured toward earlier, that like this was the wrong way to do the decision, is too sweeping, but it was done in this tone. I will tell you, let us now praise Ross Douthat for a moment. Okay. I would not perhaps expect myself to be like the number one cheerleader for Ross Douthat of all people, but the more I watch what has happened to David French at the New York Times, which really was only a continuation of his trajectory ever since the Trump years.
Totally.
But as you indicate, right, they brought him on to be this dissenting, reasonable, sort of moderate conservative voice for their very liberal readership, which is also sort of what Douthat is there to do. And Douthat takes a lot of heat, both from the crazy people in the NYT comment section, but also from our side for ceding too much and being a squish and whatever. But Douthat makes like conservative, sometimes quite socially conservative arguments in the pages of the Times, whereas David French has just become indistinguishable from like Charles Blow. I mean, what is like, it's hilarious. But anyway, so that is just to say, I mean, you can sort of count him among like the Keith Olbermanns of the world for having said that this is somehow, I mean, David French is a lawyer and is a much more experienced legal mind than I am. But I fail to see how this isn't the opposite of what he's saying. Like, this strikes me as an actually very carefully reasoned attempt to preserve this like situation from judicial.
Tell me if I'm wrong, but I don't think there's any there's no precedent on this section of the 14th Amendment, right? I mean,
no, because nobody's ever been bonkers enough to come up with to try to use it.
I mean, it's one of the parts of the Constitution that, I know everybody wants to think of the Constitution as not time bound or something, but there's obviously parts of it that only relate to very specific incidents in history.
It's the analog of the clause in Magna Carta that deals with fishing rights off the Isle of Wight.
Or the Third Amendment, or that part where it talks about trial by jury for amounts over $20. I mean, it's there's certain things that just don't really come up. And the idea of that Lawrence tribe and a bunch of crazed Hillary people got it into their heads that they were going to push this as a means to keep Trump from even running. And now I guess they're the Democrats in Congress are planning to keep it they want to okay, we'll have a vote in Congress that he's an insurrectionist. And I gather now there's this whole plan, if he wins, to refuse to certify. I mean, essentially what they're claiming that
accusing him of doing, of course, right? I mean, as always, right? But no, I guess that is sort of on one level, that's a reasonable response if you've already accepted the totally cockalorum premise that Trump did an insurrection, should be kicked off the ballot, that is a politically viable route to resolving our national disputes, is to make it possible to evict somebody who commands millions of people's votes from public life and to bar him from ever making it to the electoral contest. If you genuinely believe that is the most principled and serene way to get us past through this bumpy time in our history, then you would say, okay, so the Supreme Court has made this decision. We will in fact take it to Congress. Except they literally already did that. They impeached Trump for doing an insurrection and then failed to make the case, and now I don't know. I mean, again, even if they did it, it would be such a political disaster that it would have to.
They don't see. It's so funny because they really seem to believe that that half the country is just wrong. Half the country is somehow possessed by this spirit of I don't know, just anarchy or fascism or whatever it is.
Yeah,
it's completely anti-democrat. I mean, so look at Pakistan. They've put Imran Khan in prison. I think we talked about this already. For some bogus, ostensibly, some legalistic bogus reason. But I guess that's what they like. That's what they want to do here. Or in Peru, they're always jailing the former presidents of Peru or South Korea. You know what I mean? I mean,
seem like model states for us.
Yeah. So is that what they want to do here? Just
there's definitely this fantasy, I think, among. I mean, I don't know what I never know what the people who are actually in charge are thinking. I suspect they sort of don't know what they're thinking themselves, and.
If they believe it.
That's one thing. If they believe it and all of that. But there is definitely this fantasy among your kind of normie leftist. And the right is not immune to this in some circles, that if you could just arrive at the proper means for removing this person altogether, flatly delegitimizing his claim to not even to the presidency, but just to be considered for the presidency, then finally all of this Sturm und Drang would go away. And so the left's version of this is, if we can convict him, then everybody will see, the scales will fall from their eyes. And we on the right are smoking our cigarette and being good luck. We have already made the case against Trump from within a million times from within the ranks. It's not going to work. And it's definitely the opposite of that is going to happen if you do jail him, of course. That's how you get, really bad stuff going down. And the right sometimes indulges in this too, or will be like, oh, if we can just get Obama's birth certificate, then everybody will see, that he's over. But it's like, but then what's going to happen? Like, let's imagine that is revealed. I mean, I guess that sometimes you do, in fact, come out with these big revelations and the tide really shifts. But like, yeah, this is not that. This is an attempt to force the question so that we don't actually have to do the thing that we, are now doing, which is rehashing the Biden-Trump question.
Well, I've seen these polls that say, well, yes, Trump is ahead. People support Trump, but if he were convicted of a crime, then his support would.
I've said this before. I'll say it again. This is my hottest take. I don't usually make predictions. I am certain that the opposite of that is true. I am so convinced.
Right, but I suspect the way the poll is. I suspect the way the question is worded.
Yeah.
Doesn't include all of the irregularities of the trial. And
it's like if you were convicted of being the maximally bad, like if he got a crime, if he got convicted of being Satan, would you still vote for him? And that's they frame this question this way, but he's already there even what I think is the strongest case against him, the one in Georgia, is already totally compromised by this insane scandal that's going on with Bonnie Willis. So no, I mean, that just seems wrong to me. But he is up in the poll. I mean, he's at sort of.
He's actually beating Biden in the polls.
Exactly. Like CBS, it has him at 52, 53 or something. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. That seems the polls typically underestimate Trump. So
well, I don't. You never know. Maybe they're playing games, trying to pump up his strength, so to scare the Democrats or to make the Republicans feel like they can sit this one out or something. I don't know, like they did in 22. I don't really know.
And we're so far out and all of that. I mean, this is
indeed.
Yes, not to use a hackneyed word, but this is kind of an unprecedented amount of time for us to now have to just basically argue this same set of issues. And there's a whole domain that we haven't even touched on, which is whatever crazy George Floyd-esque scenario the left might try to engineer between now and then. And all
I think we'd be foolish to imagine that the summer is going to be placid,
right? Yeah,
or that they're not going to have some. So they've got to have something up their sleeve. I mean, they've got to, they're working every angle they can. So it's hard to imagine that they wouldn't, come up with some really heinous or although, with street violence, I mean, I guess the only street violence that would hurt Trump would be if you had I don't know, some Fry Corps type, rampaging through the streets, white nationalists, Right.
There's definitely the Fed state operation version of things. I mean, kind of like you were saying with January 6th, there's a big difference between now and 2020, which is that we've all lived through. I mean, if the January 6th is receded into memory, the trauma of COVID for the right has really not. We've all lived through that already. And even the stuff that we said was, that some people were well, maybe this or that, has now been totally disproved. The Fauci stuff is now so damning and so well documented that you'd have to come up with something very different. Not that I'm sure they're working around the clock to do exactly that.
They've radically cynicalized the voters. I mean, people do not have. I mean, between everything since 2015, it's just been a nonstop demonization and pauperization. Just everything they've done. And now, people are really, willing to see conspiracies where there probably aren't. And, I think I think there was some blowback.
Yeah. And there's been blowback also to the woke. Peak woke took a while to get get here.
Mhm.
It didn't, sort of lasted a little longer, but there's more of that now, more hostility to that. I mean, this is the opposite aspect of that winnowing that you were talking about earlier. If all the other sort of factions have spun off, what you're left with is a much, much more kind of committed, hard scrabble, in some cases nervy and maybe even paranoid, but like definitely impervious core of people. So yeah, I mean, that's just they're much more, in largely, I think, sort of admirably, although in some cases, as you indicate, not so much. There's one thing that, like, among the things that have really caused people to be jaded, one thing that we haven't talked about at all is immigration, right? Is just which is like kind of the enormous glaring one. Something like 300,000 immigrants, it now turns out, have been not simply bussed across the border, not simply allowed across the border, but flown across the border by the Biden administration to locations that they will not reveal for supposed security reasons. They're doing this through the CBP1 app, which, as far as I can tell, is kind of like DoorDash, but for permanent residency in the United States. Like, it's like you call an Uber, except it's now a private jet that takes you from Venezuela to Cleveland and just leaves you there. Like, I mean, this. So okay,
they won't. I'm sorry, they won't reveal where the people came from or which airports they went to. And they say the reason they did it was to reduce compression at the border.
Wow.
Like, to make things easier, because just things were getting so stressed at the border. But it's like, so you're just going to run charter flights to bring people who want to come here?
It's like it's as if we had congestion on the 405. It's like, well, we're running this, major super highway from South America and other countries into our country. And so we just need to ease that up a little bit. Right.
It's not a permanent program. It's just a stopgap, just to, get people, just to make things easier for folks. Sure. So we're running weekly flights from Lagos, and we've got flights from Dakar, and wherever else. And
meanwhile, I'm sure you saw this, like, crime in Venezuela is at like a 22-year low. And people are sort of speculating that, well, it certainly is part of that. Part of that is certainly the fact that, like, Venezuelan people are coming over here in larger numbers for some periods than, like, Mexicans even. So there's just this enormous Venezuelan influx. We talked about the murder.
Hell is empty and all the devils are here.
No, I know. It's like, remember that guy, that weird orange guy that was like, they're not sending their best? Like, they're literally sending not their best.
Worst.
Like, yeah, they're worst.
Well, this happened under Carter with, like, the Mariel boat lift.
Right. This is Cuba, right? Castro.
Yeah, Cuba. Castro said, okay, let's just empty the insane asylums and the jails, and America can have them since they love Cubans so much. I mean, would anybody doubt that Maduro would do the same thing? Who knows? Who knows what China is sending? Like,
they would both be stupid not to. Yeah, they would both be dumb not, if given their interest. If you imagine yourself to be Xi Jinping or Maduro, like, why would you not just totally use America as like the new Australia?
Yeah, right.
Like, just offload all.
Well, that's who we brag we are. Whenever anyone brings up the new Colossus by Emma Lazarus, give us your tired, your poor. America's a sump. America's a garbage can. Give us your wretched refuse. We'll take them. This is who we are. So, the communists love that poem, and they love to repeat it. And they, according to them, like, a Venezuelan criminal is more American than, somebody who was born here, whose great grandparents were born here and has, like, worked and paid taxes his whole life and served in the military. They're like equivalent to a Venezuelan pickpocket or whatever robber who just crossed the border. It's, and it's not up to you to decide who comes here.
Right. I mean, yearning to breathe free, yearning to lurk in the bushes and jump a college student, same, you know? Right. So there was, I mean, the idea that like this is this great land of opportunity for people that love this country is now like, therefore, it's impossible to make any criticisms of like anybody that comes here. And like this ridiculous joke that these are people fleeing. I mean, obviously, many of these countries do have terrible economic conditions, and like a lot of these people are trying to better their lot and all this stuff. And then you bring up the fact that also they seem to be like just emptying out the prisons to send to us, and this makes you racist. But so, I mean, as you, I think, indicated in that piece also, you know, the Biden administration is constantly saying that this is the securest border it's ever been. And in much the same way that like the economy is booming and people like economists, you know, Paul Krugman is writing articles about like, why don't people see how great the economy is? Similarly, it's like, why don't people understand how secure the border is? We have to play this clip by, it's Rachel Maddow with Jen Psaki, just laughing about the idea that people in Virginia care about they do have a border. Let's just play it. It's too good.
I mean, if you look at some of these exit polls, I mean, I live in Virginia. Immigration was the number one issue. I mean, again, these could change in Virginia.
Well, Virginia does have a border with West Virginia. Very, very contested area.
Build the wall. Like, what?
So this is like, I forget who it was that, I think it was Carol Markowitz, was like, if you just save this clip in the event of a Trump win, just look back and this, you'll know why. Like, this is why, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, this is people seem to, this is not like something that we are just making up, right? As people who watch the news, like real people actually care about this, it seems.
Absolutely. I mean, here's what I think what's happened is in 2015, when Trump made his comments about building a wall and immigration and, you know, they're not sending their best, they're sending rapists. I think a lot of people, Republicans, Democrats, just people who haven't necessarily been paying attention to the border or to immigration or these kinds of issues, you know, with a kind of consistency. To them, I think they were like a little taken aback. They're like, what is he talking about? We need to build a wall on the border. Like maybe they knew that, yeah, there are undocumented people in the country, but the idea that there was like a bum rush just seemed kind of bizarre. And so it became a central point of his 4 years. And then Biden came in and, you know, there was such a strong reaction to it. And the advocates were so, you know, so fiercely in favor of reversing the Trump, not just reversing whatever minor things Trump done to defend, to protect the border, secure the border, but to really push it in the direction that the left has always wanted, which is really, you know, to eliminate the border, to essentially eliminate the nation effectively.
To which they are philosophically committed. I mean, that's not like a sort of peripheral consequence of something else. I mean,
this was like a day one Biden doctrine. He issued executive orders saying that we were going to like stop deportations and essentially, you know, let anyone come in.
Unlike the Israel situation, like the extreme position does not represent a tension with Biden's actual agenda. It's the other way around. It's like people are trying to rein him in a little bit, and he's kind of just all in.
Right.
Open.
Although, you know, I think one thing that's kind of interesting, and this is, I'm just reminded because you brought up Israel, the whole idea of the one state solution for Israel, like the idea being that, well, we already have a one state, that the occupied territories are functionally part of Israel. So we just need to open it up and recognize that it is a one state. I kind of think like ultimately the goal is like a one state solution for the world.
Yeah.
Like,
right. Yeah. No, it's like, I mean, because this was like, I mean, for a while, this was a big kind of almost bipartisan idea, right? Was this kind of neoliberal, I mean, it was going to be trade that bound us all together. And there were various, I mean, I'm skirting over a bunch of nuance, but yeah, this was sort of supposed to be the next thing. And in this sort of Fukuyama-esque way, we realized that no, actually, like we haven't come up with a better thing than the nation state. Like a one world government is just a one world dictatorship.
Yeah.
And so a lot of us were like, whoa, pump the brakes. Like maybe in fact borders, maybe in fact nations. But a serious like number of leftists just continued happily on into those sunlit uplands. And so there is now this commitment to that.
Well, they can't back off from it. They cannot back up from the elimination of the nation state. That's like core. That's like their number one thing. I mean, that's the Internationals program.
Yeah, and it sort of it emblematizes all of these other talking points or vague ideals about the brotherhood of man. I mean, it's just a lot of like sort of post-Christian heresies, essentially, where you take this idea that we are all children of God and you like immanentize the eschaton and make that a political scenario right here, right now. So yeah, like 300,000, that number is galling because of the thing that's happening and how brazen it is that they're flying people over, but like dwarfed compared to the millions and millions of people that have gone. I mean, and I think this is a really important point that you're making about the change in Trump's position relative to both the extremist nature of the problem and to kind of where people generally have gone. I was listening to his speech after all the Super Tuesday wins, and he's talking about all the things that have gone wrong. And if I'd been president, you wouldn't have Russia invading Ukraine. I mean, kind of typical Trump thing where he's like, if I were president, we would all be like living in Candyland. Yeah. Some plausible, some not. But then he did something that I have not heard him do that much, which is talk about deportations, like expressly be like, and we're going to have to deport a lot of bad people. Like, the wall is one thing, right? The wall is let's have a border. Deportation is like the situation has, I mean, that is like, and I didn't see a lot of people comment on it, but that represents, I think, a real like ratchet.
Well, he talked about that 8 or 9 years ago, like when he was running in 2016. He talked about they got to go back, we got to send them back, and it was just seen as that's where the whole thing about ICE as a Gestapo came out of. Like
okay.
And but no, I think, and this is where I kind of wanted to go with my what I was talking about before, is that I think people have sort of caught up to him. And you don't have to be like a V-Dare reader or a Steve Saylor fan to now understand why open borders and illegal immigration are problems.
Right.
And look, I don't know if the problem, I mean, I don't know, did you see this case in France of this imam?
No,
I can't remember his name right now. Marjoubi or something like that. He gave a sermon where he very offhandedly insulted the tricolor, like the French flag. And he's basically called like the French flag like an emblem of Satan or something like that. Well, the French police came to his door. They arrested him, and within 8 or 12 hours, he was on a plane to Tunis, which he had left when he was 12. They deported him. They were like, get out. France, I guess, has these new laws regarding like deportation and immigration and so forth. The thing is, I can't imagine America.
No. And I don't want to live in that America. I mean, I definitively do not want to live in that America. I mean, that's the European right. Like there is a difference. That's why there's a difference between the American right and the European right. And I absolutely do not want to live in that America. I don't think
I wouldn't mind living in that America.
I know. You're a right-wing nutcase, and I
just can't see it happening because, like, we've got all these Hawaiian judges, who can enforce national injunctions on anything the president wants to do. So I can't really see it ever happening here. But I thought it was interesting.
No, I mean, I do think I don't even think that Trump wants to enact that kind of policy. I think I think he's talking in his typically vague Trumpian terms about the Venezuelan guy who's accused of murdering Lincoln Piley. Like that's sort of what he's saying is, we can't just sort of let people run free and rampant when they're here illegally and whatever. I suspect. I mean, again, I don't know, but yeah, your general point about people catching up to Trump, like I don't think they've caught up to France, and I think you're right that like Americans generally probably won't unless things get just like apocalyptically bad.
Right.
But I do think they've caught up to Trump in this way. That yeah, like it's. I mean, I'm reading this book right now that's just a bunch of interviews with like kind of lower to middle class people across the spectrum. It's called Second Class, and it's about like the betrayal of the working class, basically by both parties, and like it's people from everywhere, all sides of the political spectrum, whatever. And this is something that they all now are talking about. It's like they're taking jobs. They're I have nothing against people from other countries, nothing against the American dream, all of that, but like this has gone insane. So yeah, I mean we'll see, but I think you're right.
I mean, there's no way you can talk about the housing crunch going on in all of the major cities without asking yourself, well, where are all these 10 million people living?
Exactly.
I mean, there's obvious problems that will be mostly felt by like you said, people in like the working class, lower middle class. I don't know. Look, I think 2024 is either going to be a like crazy romp for Trump where he wins like 400 electoral votes, or it'll be, Biden outdid himself and got 100 million popular votes.
You got more votes than there are people in this country.
Yeah, right.
Okay, well, I'm gonna leave it at that. I'm gonna cut us off there because I think that's an excellent prediction, and I agree with you. I think those are basically based on what's happening right now. Those are the options that seem to be on the table. Our listeners need to read our damn website. It's AmericanMind.org, and we always like to recommend a couple pieces at the end of every episode. For me, it's no contest this week, although always everything we run is fascinating. Tradwife Ideology Won't Save You by Lane Scott is the must-read piece on our website right now. Lane wrote for us another piece about the fact that basically the trads and the right tend to regard housewifery with this misty-eyed kind of idealism that they're telling you're telling people to stay home with their kids in the wrong way. You're telling them in this kind of gauzy, beautiful, ideal picture, and she's like, her point is basically it is wonderful and fulfilling to be a mother and a housewife, but it's also incredibly hard. And we need to present it more as kind of this adventure and this, the hardest thing you'll ever do, this incredible school of prudence and all this stuff. So that piece was great. This piece is also great. It's called Tradwife Ideology Won't Save You. And it's about the fact that ideology just is a bad way to live your life. It might be a, necessary tool for thinking about certain like policy questions. She's not really addressing that, but she's talking about the way that the internet and political ideology just makes caricatures out of all of us and out of our picture of what the world should be like, and ends us up advising these totally unworkable ways of life. And instead, in order to recover some sense of sanity, what we're going to have to do is move into the future in a way that is informed by the past, but also is innovative. And she advocates in this sort of evaluating people and movements by their humor, hope, and creativity, which I just think is like this kind of talk is really, I think, needful on the right, really rare. Lane articulates it beautifully, and this is a piece to really like ruminate upon and indeed execute on. Tradwife Ideology Won't Save You by Lane Scott. Okay, Seth, what do you got?
Yeah, the Lane Scott's piece is excellent, and it's a refreshing and kind of sobering point she makes that.
Yeah,
you're not going to be June Cleaver necessarily. Right. You know what I mean?
Or like it's Instagram, like, whoever. Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
Standing with an Aga stove, kind of, making sourdough bread for 6 hours or whatever.
This is a tangent, but I just have to ask you: have you ever seen Posh Nosh?
No.
It's like a YouTube series. I'll send it to you. Link to it, but it's just It's this beautiful country home where the man, the English husband, is advising everybody on how to live their life and whatever. And just in the background and in the opening credits, his wife is like, she's like the slightly lower class woman that he's married to basically be the help. And she's like kneading bread with her sweaty forearms. And that's what this whole set of issues reminds me of. Anyway.
A piece I like, it's kind of related. It's by Adam Ellwanger. It's called Open Wide. The regime is desperate to impose polyamory. And, he's sort of talking about World War P, trying to get everybody to explore ethical non-monogamy. And he goes through a whole bunch of different reasons why they're so into it. He makes one really good point that I liked, which is like the left really fought hard to decouple love and sex, right? Mm-hmm. To make it like, these two things don't necessarily go together. But then as part of like the gay rights movement and the whole sexual revolution, they kind of had to weaponize sex in the name of love. Like, so for instance, that guy who was having sex with somebody, his boyfriend or whatever, in the Senate Judiciary room.
Oh yeah,
they had to say
making porn of it, not just
yes,
video.
But they said that he was fired for his act of love,
right?
And it kind of goes along with the whole whatever. You've seen this with a lot of like gay related media talking about that it's all love, but is that really what the problem is? Is that America hates love? Yeah, that the powers in control want to stop love from happening. Anyway, it's a good piece. Open Wide by Adam Ellwanger.
No, that is a good piece. And that whole thing was so astroturfed. I mean, it's never been more transparent. There were like 5 pieces that all came out, like a book and all this stuff. Mm-hmm. No, totally. Okay. And that does it for us this week. If you like what we do here, you will like all the pieces, not just the 2 that we mentioned, on AmericanMind.org. And you should also go check out the rest of the stuff we do. There's a sister publication to this one called the Claremont Review of Books. It comes out 4 times a year, and we just had a new issue. You can get it at ClaremontReviewOfBooks.com. And when you subscribe, you will also get the physical copy in your mailbox, which is a delight and increasingly a rarity in today's digital landscape. If you want to learn more about our projects generally, you can visit our DC-based Center for the American Way of Life at dc.claremont.org, and you can donate to support us, which we really appreciate. We get by on the support and the love of our listeners, our supporters, and all of that. So it's claremont.org/donate if you want to kick a little or a lot of money our way. To support this podcast, the easiest thing to do is just give us 5 stars wherever you're listening. Subscribe, share, tweet about it, text your grandma, tell your cat. All new listeners are welcome listeners, as indeed are our stalwart regulars. We're grateful for all of you. That's it from us. Thanks to our production and engineering crew, Jake Gannon and Logan Zeppieri. And thanks to you all for listening. We will talk to you next week.